You're viewing Iowa Public Television. Enjoy more TV worth watching next.
Stimulate jobs.
Killing ourselves with health costs.
We're $4 trillion in debt.
Nuclear weapons.
National economic strategy.
Finest education system.
The candidates. A final look before the vote. Talking with David Frost.
Stay tuned. Then stay with us for the Nightly Business Report.
I'm Jim Lara. On November 3rd, join Robert McNeil and me for a NewsHour Election Night special with full analysis of the returns and live reports from campaign headquarters. The following night, November 4th, we'll be back with a special 90-minute look at the next 4 years, asking the simple question, now what? Join us for these important public events here on public television.
You're viewing Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future. This program is brought to you by Primerica, a family of financial companies including Smith Barney Investments, Primerica Financial Services, Term Insurance, Commercial Credit, Personal Loans, and American Capital Management Mutual Funds.
The volunteers in all 50 states have asked me to run as a candidate for President of the United States.
I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
And I'm honored to accept your nomination for President of the United States.
The presidential candidates. Talking with David Frost.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this special 90-minute edition of Talking with David Frost, in which we shall be bringing you 3 separate conversations with President Bush, Ross Perot, and Governor Clinton. We caught up with the candidates this week on the road. In fact, there were times as we traveled from Washington to Minneapolis to Cedar Rapids to Des Moines to Dallas and to Pittsburgh when we felt like candidates ourselves, except of course that we weren't running for anything, just running. That's the difference between British and American campaigns. In America, candidates run for office. In Britain, they just stand for office, much less traveling. We're going to bring you the 3 conversations in the order in which they took place. So we begin on Monday night talking to President Bush in what you will soon deduce is the Bush Quail headquarters in Des Moines. Well, Mr. President, thank you for finding the time to sit down with us. I suppose you've had another busy day disrupting weddings?
Well, I'll tell you, that thing's been laid to rest, fortunately. But I had a good day, 4 states, and feeling quite encouraged.
And in fact, do you think overall Ross Perot has been a positive factor in this race or not?
Well, I think that I'll tell you what he's done is he struck a chord early on with volunteers and people that kind of felt left out, and I think that was positive. I can't analyze the race right now. Many think that his being there is helpful to me, and as opposed to Governor Clinton, but I leave that to all the gurus behind the scenes, the analysts.
Right. And is it the same George Bush that people voted for in 1988 voting for today, or has 4 years in that job changed you?
It's changed me. I'm more seasoned. I understand better what it is to be president, the kinds of decisions you have to make as president. I think I've got a broader perspective of the fact of our economy as it relates to the rest of the world. Some would have you believe that we're an economy that is totally isolated. And when you look at the rest of the world, you recognize not only is it the United States that's going to lead the rest of the world out of the doldrums, but that we are doing better than many other world economies. And it's those kinds of perspectives that I've gotten from dealing with problems both here and abroad.
In terms of economic doldrums, though, Mr. President, there are other factors. There's global recession, there's a borrow and spend policies of the 80s, there's Congress or whatever.
Oh, heavens, yes.
All of those 3, at least. What percentage of the responsibility, though, for the economic doldrums do you think is yours?
I don't know how you measure percentages, but as President of the United States, you take the blame. You don't try to shift blame if there's human error in these things. If you make a mistake, you look the American people in the eye and you say, hey, I messed that one up, and then you go on about and leading it.
But in all your agenda for renewal and so on, you've been talking about the medium term and the long term. If you're re-elected, what will you do immediately in the short term to really improve those people who are hurting?
Well, of course, what we need short term is an investment tax allowance. I still believe a capital gains cut would stimulate new small businesses.
But would it do it quickly enough?
Yes, it would do it fast. And the third thing that I've been trying to get, in a new Congress we will get, is a tax credit for the first-time home buyer, the guy that's never had a home. He and his wife are trying to buy one. You give him a little assistance, and that helps the entire housing industry, and with it all the businesses that go in. Those three things would stimulate the economy. And then I think confidence would come back, which has been lacking, if they see that with this new Congress we can go forward on my overall deficit reduction plan.
And you're going to have James Baker in your second term as economic coordinator.
He will coordinate all the cabinet positions and move this program forward. And he is a good one to do it. He has great respect on Capitol Hill. We'll have strong cabinet government. There will be a lot of new people. And we spelled out certain initiatives that we'll take the minute this election is over in order to get moving. One of them is to sit down with the new members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, because you're not going to have the gridlock in a new Congress we've had in this one. The only way they felt they could win, the liberal Democratic leaders, is to have everything be terrible. So when I suggested these things to stimulate the economy, they screeched that Congress to a halt. That's going to change. People are tired of Congress.
But with all these requests for resignations from everyone for the day after the election, and James Baker in there as economic coordinator, does that mean that you're going to break up the Brady, Boskin, Darman team?
David, that sounds frighteningly like an inside the beltway question of a man of your perspective. But nevertheless, I haven't said who's going to do what. You know, a lot of people want me to say, oh, we're going to move all these people out. I've never believed in shifting the blame to somebody. If there's blame, the captain of the ship accepts it.
So are you saying that Brady, Boskin, and Darman will stay?
I'm not saying they'll stay, and I'm not saying they'll go, but I'll be sure to let you know early on when I make a decision. It's just not appropriate for me to say that, but we're going to have a new team, and everybody knows it. I think Nick Brady indicated the other day that he doesn't plan to stay, and I think Boskin has said the same thing. But I don't want to be the one to say that right now.
What about the people who say about all the candidates that the sums don't really add up, that that they're too optimistic, that when you talk about savings of 132 billion in 5 years, then on the other hand there's 165 billion in new promises since the campaign began. When you talk about mandatory caps saving 294 billion, on the other hand the 10% tick-off for people to put it to the deficit could cost 250 billion, and so that only leaves 44 billion for all the other promises, and nothing left for the deficit.
Well, the checkoff goes strictly to the deficit, so that will be working with the same thing as the controlling the growth of the mandatory program. You see, the thing that's out of control is these mandatory programs. 2/3 of our budget never comes to the president. And so I have proposed capping the growth, not the programs.
Now, in terms of this, where you've said very clearly about cutting entitlements and so on, and you've said not Social Security, and your mid-session review said the options included capping Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, food stamps. Which of those options do you prefer today?
I'm not going to say that
Iowa?
Today, and I wouldn't say it.
Why not?
Because all you do is get special interest groups standing out in front of the hotel tonight. I want to have a nice sleep, and I'm not going to do it by saying we put in we put 30 different options, and the Congress and I will sit down, the leaders, when this election is over, and we'll say, all right, now let's select which of these many options we need to do. And it's not going to be easy. Somebody is going to get hurt.
But
or not get as much as they want. But it's not cutting. It is controlling the growth.
Right, capping. But isn't it possible that someone watching this program in, say, Little Rock, Arkansas, might suggest that not to give that answer now is almost, dare I say it, waffling?
No, they wouldn't say waffling. They might say political. But I haven't changed my position. You see, the definition of a waffler is one who takes one position one day and changes it to the next over and over again. And that's what Governor Clinton has religiously been doing. I have specifically said from day one...
Religiously is good, because you said they didn't put God in their manifesto, so that's good.
Day after day, I've been saying, I'm not going to say that. I'm telling you the formula for getting the job done. And there's no point having it picked apart by the nitpickers before you get ready to put it into action.
Under the next Bush administration, if it happens, how long would it take jobs, how long would it take unemployment to get down from approximately 7.5% to 5%?
I don't know, but it's gone down 3 straight months, and you know the way it's played in the press over here? Bad news for President Bush. Job market shrinks. These commentators wouldn't know good news if it hit them in the head with a hammer. They simply are unable to report anything decent about the economy. They never report that it's been growing, albeit anemically. And they keep talking about a deep recession when we've had 5 straight quarters of growth. So I don't know how long it would take, but I just hope it keeps on going down.
But one thing a lot of people say is that you really got...
Some of that depends on the export market.
Yeah.
And some of that depends on the economy of others.
A lot of people say you got the worst of both worlds by saying you made a mistake over the budget deal of 1990, because on the one hand, what was that phrase? Someone said the most exciting attack on federal spending ever. But by saying it was a mistake, you got attacked for introducing new taxes, and then you didn't get the credit for an attack on federal spending.
No, we take credit.
Whereas Ronald Reagan managed to do tax cuts and somehow make them seem like a miracle.
Well, he had tax increases. You mean tax increases?
Tax increases, yeah.
He was masterful. On the tax bill, there were some good things in it. The best thing was the cap on what they call discretionary spending. And we managed to control that, even though Congress is still struggling to get out from under it. I still think that making the concession to the Democratic tax bill, and it was a Democratic bill, and I said, all right, let's go this route, was a mistake, because it didn't stimulate the economy. We should have stayed in there and gotten more spending constraint, actual cuts. And it's tough. Nobody likes to cut spending.
You can't read the papers these days without getting stories about Iraq and Iraqgate and all that and so on. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think we wooed Saddam Hussein for too long, that we were still trying to get him into the family of nations when it was clear he had no family values at all?
No, I don't. I think we had the right policy. It did not work. People have to be fair and look at what was going on in the world at the time. Here was the man with the 4th largest army in the world. We were being urged by our friends and subsequently allies to be not so tough on Saddam in terms of our controls on him. And I think the policy was worth the try. And then, when we did what we had to do, that was correct too. And many of the people that opposed me on going to the war are now trying to have a revisionistic view of history and try to equate and say that that could have all been avoided if we simply hadn't reached out to Saddam. They are wrong. They are dead wrong, and history will prove them wrong.
And in terms of history, one thing I wasn't quite clear on, what has now become your very famous National Security Directive 26, which you signed on October the 2nd. Would you have gone ahead and signed that if you'd known all the information that was circulating among the officials at State and Defense and Energy and Agriculture and the CIA?
Absolutely.
About the bank in Atlanta and about the nuclear plans of Saddam. If you'd known about those, would you still have signed it, or did you know about them, or some of them, and decide that in fact national priorities came first and our strategic needs were paramount?
I think we did exactly the right thing, and there are all kinds of weird, erroneous allegations out there, and the fact that the bank was doing things, that is not the U.S. policy. When I was president, we made $500 million in ag credits went through that, were given to Iraq, not through that bank, incidentally, and they paid back $837 million while I was president. And I think we were right to extend the grain credits. If the bank was doing something illegal, that was wrong. But you got a lot of people that lived in the basement of the Pentagon who are now big policy experts telling us how we should have done it. We did the right thing. The directive was very clear that we were not enhancing their military or certainly their nuclear capability, and we did the right thing in going in there and destroying his army and kicking him out of Kuwait. So these revisionists are coming at it from one side after another, and I am confident that that directive was correct.
And you would have done it even, you knew some of the factors about their nuclear build-up and so on.
Oh, everybody thought they might be doing something.
But when you signed that, you didn't know about the bank in Atlanta and the $4 or $5 billion scandal and so on.
Well, no, absolutely not.
When did you find out about that? Was it from
from
State Department, CIA, or William Safire?
I can't possibly remember. But I think I have access to the best intelligence in the world, and I can't help you on the chronology. But the record is very clear. We have made full disclosure. I remember being challenged in one of the debates. Get the records. We've leveled with the Congress. They've had hearings after hearings. They've had all the testimony and documents. And I've never seen such a phony charade trying to equate this with something wrong from a lot of people who were wrong, who did not understand and wouldn't. If I'd have listened to those guys, the critics now, Saddam Hussein would be sitting in downtown Riyadh atop the world's oil supplies with a nuclear weapon. And so we did what we had to do, and now you got a lot of second guessers trying to say, well, we should have done it differently ex post facto. That's not the way it works when you're president.
Operation Desert Storm, everyone would agree that was a remarkable achievement and so on. And in your State of the Union, you said something to the effect that we ought to get the same sense of purpose exhibited in our approach to the domestic front and so on. Why have you not been able to engender that?
Because in Desert Storm, I didn't have to have the United States Congress. In the Desert Storm, we brought them along, and we said, we're going to do this. And said, if you want to have peaceful solution to this, you support me on this resolution from the United Nations. In domestic policy, it's entirely different. They appropriate every dime, David. They tell me how to spend every dime, and you're working, particularly in the last couple of years, with dedicated liberal partisans who wanted to see me fail domestically. Now, maybe there's more persuasive ways for me to be, but the beautiful thing is we'll have a new Congress, and the gridlock will be gone because I'll be able to do in the second term what I was able to do in the first term, in the beginning. Clean Air Act, Americans for Disability Act.
And you're going to have Jim Baker as your Schwarzkopf.
Well, yeah, but we still got to work with Congress, but we're going to have so many new members, and also the politics have begun. They're not going to have to worry about my being reelected. They're not going to have to say, hey, in their back rooms, this will make the president look good, so we won't do it. There was some interesting stuff came out of one of the Democratic caucuses where the whole thing was, well, we better not pass this. It'll make the president look good. Put the country's interests aside. Sorry, we want to play politics. They won't have any threat from me anymore. I'm not going to run again, but I'm going to be ready from day one to take this message of economic soundness to the Congress, and I think we can make real progress.
With all the hecticness of it, actually, this is obviously your last campaign, whatever the result. Are you kind of relieved about that?
I'm thrilled about it. I am absolutely, and driving down to the wire with I've never felt more energetic. You weren't in this country at the time, and one of the things I'm a little upset about the media, about the national media. I always separate out the local media, the photographers, the guys that carry the cameras, but it's these talking heads. And for a while there was a spate of stories that George Bush is in bad health. We couldn't shake it. Doctor would go out and reveal health records and talk about. I have never felt better. I feel like a spring cold going right down to the wire to whip this governor and be reelected for the people, not for me.
Well, maybe that was because
life.
you kept on saying, I'm sick and tired of this, and I'm sick and tired of that.
Well, that's typical.
Maybe they took it out of context.
I saw some, no, that's just an expression.
Yeah,
it means there's another little more vulgar expression that I will restrain myself from using on a program that reaches out to so many million people.
We've got to keep up the family values.
We must keep the family values up there. But I saw that analysis, and that was another one, sick and tired. Does this mean he has some psychological sickness or tiredness? Hey, I ran my 2.5 miles this morning, and I've never felt better. And I'm working 12, 14 hours a day, and I've never felt better. And I go to work for the people at 7 o'clock in the morning, you wake up at 5. I'm going to change that in the next term because I read 7 newspapers between 5 and 7. That's gone. Not going to do that anymore. Just go and get the business.
Because you don't have to run anymore. You don't have to run an election anymore. What are the qualities of character that you've got, you think, that are important that maybe Bill Clinton doesn't have?
Well, if I make a mistake, I admit it. That's character. And I can make a tough decision. And I've demonstrated that. And I think that that's very important in being president. Stick around, I'll try to think of some more.
Do you
I don't want to knock his... I don't want to...
Do you like him?
Yes. I like Bill Clinton. I know him. He's a personable guy. You know, it's funny, these debates. I hate the debate kind of milieu where there's this tension and everybody do this, say that, get this one-liner. But after the debate, I had a very pleasant visit with him. And I think he'd probably say the same thing, but I just differ. I just differ on philosophy. I think he'll be eaten alive, as Jimmy Carter was, by that Democratic Congress. And we'll go back to the Malaise days at 21.5% interest rates for the United States. You can't, you stand up to the special interest. And so I have no problems personally, but I just have this visceral feeling that we're different on our confidence about the United States, how to lead the United States, how to lead the world, as a matter of fact.
What about change? Everyone says change, change, change. Yeah. Isn't that tough when you've been in power one way and another for 12 years to paint yourself as the apostle of change?
Look at the changes in the world. Look at democracy and freedom. Look at our exports. Look at their interest rates. They've changed for the better. Look at inflation. Changed for the better. But just to talk about change and say change for the sake of change, there's no way to do it. Doesn't mean anything. He's talking about changes that are spending and taxing. Governor Clinton talks about investing. Government investing. Government doesn't invest. It takes money from the people and spends it. And I'm talking about investing by stimulating small business. That's who creates the jobs. It's not the government that should invest. So we got a fundamentally different philosophy. Europe has given up. Eastern Europe has given up on the government doing the investment. And here these guys are talking about more government investment. They're disconnected.
But why shouldn't the torch pass to a new generation? Or do you think that your generation has still got more savvy?
I don't think it's generational. I think it's individual. Who's the individual to lead? Who do the people trust? Who has the character? People still look... You know, the big difference on that point, Governor Clinton said it's not the character of the president, but the character of the presidency. David, they're interlocked. They're inseparable. At any moment in history, they are inseparable. And that is a key point. And I have tried very hard to uphold the trust of the American people. And so has Barbara Bush. And she's done it in a profound and sensitive way. And so the question gets down on character. Who in a crisis will you trust? Who in a crisis would you like to leave your kids with? And people think that way in this country. I think they are generous in their assessment of people.
Who would you leave your kids with? Yes, indeed. And Ross Perot even was picking up those same themes and so on. And what was wrong with Bill Clinton demonstrating abroad? It wasn't the demonstrating, it was where he did it, was it?
Well,
when does dissent become disloyalty?
I'm not talking about disloyalty. I'm just talking about a personal revulsion of demonstrating against one's own country in a foreign land. I've always been repulsed by that. We are the United States, and I don't think you do that. And if you want to demonstrate, come and get in line in front of the White House. Bring your sign. Right this minute, Barbara's sitting there in her little office, looks out to the north side, and I'm sure there are people demonstrating. But maybe it's too small a difference for some, but I cannot imagine when my peers are being held in a Hanoi prison, or my peers are being drafted out of the ghettos to serve, that I will be demonstrating against my country over in England.
But it would have been.
I'm sorry,
it's all right.
I think it's wrong.
It's all right to do it outside the White House.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
because there, in this country, it sometimes needed courage to oppose the war in this country.
Well, you can look at it that way. But I just don't see going to a foreign land. You know, it's my country. Maybe, I don't know whether, maybe there is something generational here. I don't think so, though. I think a lot of young people would understand how I feel on this point.
And do you think, when people ask the question, as they used to do, are you better off than 4 years ago? In general, the public economically would seem to say probably no to that at this moment. But,
well, wait a minute.
Do you think they've got a kinder, gentler nation than 4 years ago?
In some ways, but I'll tell you why. A guy that has a mortgage on his house and has a job, and 93% of people are working in this country. A guy that can refinance his mortgage, and he'll say, I'm better off. Family income is up. They might be better off. A family that saved all their lives only to see their family being wiped out by interest at 15% when the Democrats had the White House and the Congress. Clearly he can say he's better off, or she, the saver, can say that she's better off. And so it depends. Suppose you're an ethnic guy living in Chicago, and you've been worrying for decades about your family over there. They go to bed at night saying, thank God that the United States stood firm and Poland is free, or Czechoslovakia or Hungary or the Baltic states. So it depends who you're talking to. If you're out of work, you say, hell no, I'm not better off at all. And I hope like heck something changes around here. But some Americans are better off, some are not. But the thing now is to make everybody better off, to stimulate this economy, get it going.
And kinder and gentler nation, is it?
Well, more peaceful. It's peaceful, more kind, and more gentle, I don't know. Kinder and gentler in some ways, not during a political season. It's uglier and meaner, and that will change, because as soon as the election is over, we'll go back to normal times. The election's been ugly, David. The climate in terms of the press, I've never seen anything like this. I've been in politics half my adult life, and thank God the other half was making a living, meeting a payroll, and knowing what it is to have a job.
And you said, in addition to ugly, you said it's been a weird political year.
Weird, strange, yeah.
Is it going to end strangely in the House of Representatives, do you think, this election?
No way. No way. No way.
We're at the end of the ninth inning, near the bottom of the ninth inning. You've got to hit a home run.
Comes to bat.
You've got to hit a home run.
Now, I want to do what Cabrera did, and he comes up with the Braves and won the game in the ninth. And Winfield did it to make Toronto the first time for Canada to win the World Series. It's doable. It happens. And you get that feeling. You can tell when something's moving. And that's what's going to happen this time. And then we all look back, heal the wounds, move this country forward.
When did it start moving, do you think?
I don't know, but we'll have 2,500 guys taking credit for it, which is great, because there's plenty of credit to go around to tell, well, I detected this back and so. I don't know. I'm no good on polls. I'm no good on strategy. I am good for an understanding when you get a feeling that something's happening around this country, because I've been out there a lot. And I believe I'll be reelected based on trust and character and record.
Do you believe? Are you confident? Or are you certain?
I don't know how you can be certain, but I'm as certain as I can be. And David, when all these inside books are written, it will be clearly written that I never wavered in that conviction. I have never, ever wavered. There are plenty of smarter politicians around. But on this one, when a lot of people were a little wishy-washy, I remember Margaret Thatcher saying to me at the time of the war, "George, don't go wobbly." We had some people that were going wobbly. And Lyndon Johnson put it best. He said they painted their, I'll clean this one up, he said they painted their tails white and ran with the antelope. Well, we've had a few people, some Republican commentators that written us off, but people aren't interested in the commentators. They're interested in the message. And I'm convinced I'm going to win. Never wavered in that.
Well, Mr. President, we thank you so much for finding the time here in Des Moines, Iowa, in your headquarters in Des Moines, Iowa. In George we trust, it says. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure, sir.
After Des Moines, our next destination was Dallas, where on Wednesday we talked to Ross Perot. Ross, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Back in 1965, William Buckley ran as an independent candidate for the mayorship of New York. And he said, in that way of his, that if he won, the first thing he'd do was be to immediately demand a recount, you know, because the thought of actually winning was too much for him to take. Would you do the same?
I'm doing this for the people of the United States. They asked me to do it. I've spent over $60 million out of my pocket for them. I'm doing it for them and their children. I'm doing it for the young people who are just coming of age and going to work. So no, if they decide they want me to do it, on November the 4th, I will be at work, not on Inauguration Day, the day after the election.
Right, and so you're running to win?
Absolutely. Anybody that knows me would know that.
Right, and how many states do you think you've got a chance of getting as of today? How do you think you're doing?
Our goal is to get all 50. Anybody that knows me would know that I never ran for 46, 47, or 48. And the smallest state is just as important to me as the largest. I don't look at electoral votes. I look at the people and their votes. It's their decision, but we're running to win.
And $60 million, do you think you'll have spent by Tuesday, or more than that?
I'd say that's a fair figure.
And what will be the first line of your inaugural, then?
Well, I wish I had had time to think about that, but it would be, you're the boss, and I'm Ross. I want to get this country back to the fact that the people in Washington go as the servants of the American people. I want to get rid of the regal presidency. I want to get rid of the imperial Congress. I want to go back that we come to serve and then we quietly go back home. We don't cash in with some big foreign lobbyist job or what have you. We don't take a trip and collect several $1 million. We go to serve the people and then we go back home to our private lives.
Would you, if you didn't win, I mean, you're about 18 or 20% in the polls as we talk on Wednesday. What percent do you think you'll get in the end?
I don't know. I don't take polls. I don't take polls. I don't watch polls.
You don't watch?
I talk to the people.
Well, I don't know. You don't talk to the people as much as the other two candidates because you don't get out and about as much.
David, give me a break. When you go to a rally, like the last in New Jersey, they said there were 30,000 people there. Now, that's, of course, a well-kept secret in this country because the media all have their favorite candidates, and they don't want to know that many people in New Jersey showed up to hear a Texan talk. But they did. Now, anybody that has any sense of cost effectiveness realize that when you take 30-minute blocks of television time and talk to 10 to 15 to 20 million people at a time, that's talking to the people, as opposed to 30,000 at a giant rally.
But it's not listening to the people, I meant. It's not listening to the people.
I've spent the whole year listening to the people. I'm coming down to the wire now. My objective is to get my message to everybody as efficiently as I can. There is nothing more efficient in television. You don't get to listen to people at a rally do anything but roar. You don't think these guys that show up in motor cavalcades surrounded by Secret Service get to listen to people at rallies. Please, David. Please, I show up in a rented car, and I at least get to listen to them coming and going, but that's not an organized listening.
So
a huge phone bank over here that listens all day, every day, and reports to me.
So that you were mentioning there about, pardon me, the media, and there's two people, yourself and George Bush, who both complain about the media being biased in favor of Bill Clinton.
No, I don't.
Do you think the media is biased in favor of Bill Clinton?
No.
Do you think it's biased against you?
No. The media, by now, most of them have picked a candidate. Virtually every newspaper has announced their selection of candidate. Some of the electronic media are a little more subtle about it, but that's the way the game's played. I accept that's the way the game's played. I don't want to belong to them. I want to belong to the American people. I like it. And I am very fortunate in that I can go buy time from the people who wish I weren't in the race and talk to the American people. So democracy still works.
Yeah. When they came down here, the delegations from both camps to talk to you, okay, September 28th and so on, did either of them suggest that you might have a cabinet position?
Oh, no, and they understand me, that I don't want any titles, I don't want any positions. They both, I'm sure, know me well enough to know from the past years that if there's something that I could do to help my country, I would go do it. I don't want a title. Typically, I pay all my own expenses. Typically, I pay the cost of the effort, and then I come home. That's the way I like to do things. No, nothing like that. I would hate being a cabinet member.
Would you? But what if they said, you're the man with the solution to the deficit, either campaign, will you take over the Treasury and run it? Would you?
You can't solve it as taking over the Treasury. That's too narrow a focus. It's a much broader perspective. If somebody, and again, I don't want to talk about this because I intend to run and win. Maybe I'll ask one of them to come in and help. So, you know, all of your assumptions are, here's this stray cat that's come across the screen and we got to find a home for him after the election. I've got a home right here. I've got huge business interests right here. I would love to go back to a normal life. I expect, you know, that based on what's happening out there, that the pollsters and what have you haven't figured out, you're going to get an interesting surprise on Election Day.
And therefore, you can say absolutely 100% that there's no possibility that between now and Tuesday you will withdraw from the race again and endorse, say, Bill Clinton.
Never has even crossed my mind, never has come up. It's a non-issue. It's a non-issue. No, I will be running hard for the right to work for nothing for 4 years for the American people, because I've told them if they elect me as a matter of principle, I would not accept any compensation. Now, my situation's unique, and it would be inappropriate to ask the others to do it, but in my case, it would be totally inappropriate. When we're $4 trillion in debt and going $300 and $400 billion a year in additional debt, for me, as the servant of the people who was chosen by the people, elected by the people, I go there for public service just like I've always done in the past.
And if, in fact, you win, you said you'll only run one term. You'll do one term and you won't stand for re-election, right?
And the reason I say that is I don't want to have to spend a minute worrying about what I have to say or do to some special group to get re-elected. I want to spend every minute and every day and every night putting this country back on the track, rebuilding the job base, restarting our economic engine. As I've said again and again, I'll be under the hood fixing the engine.
Yeah. And if you don't win in 92, would you run again, as a lot of people say, in 96? We'd cross that bridge when we come to it. But again, if you intend to win in 92, you don't think that way. Right, I can see
It's a non-issue. See, our whole interview is what are we going to do after election? After election, I intend to go to work the next day. I intend by Christmas to have worked with the members of Congress, the existing officials in the administration now, who are all wonderful people. We will go night and day. We will put together very firm plans for the American people to fix these problems that face us. We will present them again and again and again over television. I don't know if you've gotten to see my shows on the economy.
I've read them, and I saw one of them. Yeah.
But see, all of the know-it-alls said that the American people would never watch those shows because the American people only have an attention span of 3 to 5 minutes. But it turns out that tens of millions of ordinary people stayed glued to the set while we talked about numbers and facts.
Listen, people...
And it works.
Yeah, people said, whatever the result of the election, give the man a weekly series, they said, with those ratings.
Yeah, but the point... Well, no, that's television at its best. You know, its ratings are everything.
Yeah.
But then you have to say, well, why did people watch? Because they're concerned about where we are, where we're going. They desperately want to know the details. Just dumping a new health care program on them that they don't understand, I'm saying they will know in detail what this program is. They will know in detail how it will work. They will know in detail what it will cost. And if they don't like it, they can just let us know with a bullhorn through every congressman and straight to me. And we'll say, oops, well, we better look at this plan again before we put it into law.
I suppose today's news that, in fact, growth of 2.7% in the third quarter will help you when you become president. I mean, the climate will be that much easier.
Any growth helps. But there's nothing yet to indicate that we're out of the slump. And we haven't done the fundamental things we have to do to put the slump behind us, of the type things I've been talking about. Your next step is the industries of the future. As I mentioned earlier, our major industrial competitors have specific plans to dominate them. We don't have plans. We must have plans. We have more than our share of those blooming in this country. We need to make sure that we don't go out and break their legs all day, every day, to the point where our competitors around the world who are supporting these industries will win and we will lose. We've created the integrated circuit. Now, 19 out of 20 integrated circuits come from Japan, and the president's economic advisor says he doesn't care whether we make potato chips or computer chips. Now, that alone's enough to keep me in the race, because I do understand the difference. Both potato chips are important, but computer chips are fundamentally important.
Absolutely. And talking of debates and the candidates, were you surprised at the sort of hands-off treatment, kid-glove treatment you got from both your opponents in the debates? Or did you think, well, they're doing that because they're after my supporters?
No, I wasn't surprised.
But they treated you so gently.
Well, they should have.
Why?
Because I'm right.
Was Admiral Stockdale right, do you think, in what he said yesterday about that all Vietnam War protesters, they've got those comrades of mine that died, the extra 10 or 15,000, that blood is on your hands, you war protesters. You strung it out, you didn't stop it for one moment. Do you agree with the Admiral on that?
Admiral Stockdale suffered terribly. Admiral Stockdale was subjected to things I wouldn't even mention on television. He's a man of steel, he never broke. But certainly if you had to endure what he did for 7 years, you could understand those feelings. My position is, that's history, put it behind us, let's look forward, let's talk about the problems that really face the country, but I certainly can understand that he and Orson Swindle,
oh yes, because he said,
Orson Swindle, who suffered right alongside him and suffered terribly,
and he said
this leaves a scar in here that will never heal, and I'm sure Governor Clinton understands their strong feelings.
But you don't actually endorse them. You endorse the feelings, but not the opinion.
Well, let's assume,
is that right?
Let's assume that privately I agree completely. I'm not going to make that a campaign issue because it's not productive. Did the protesters prolong the war? Of course they did. Of course they did. You were there, I was there, we know they did. I was encouraging the nation to unite so we could get it over with more quickly, because division is a wonderful sign for the enemy. Again and again, I've said the lesson of that war is, in the future, you must first commit the nation. We never committed our nation, but we did commit our troops. We committed men of the quality of Orson Swindle and Admiral Stockdale to hell. And we sat back here and spat on them when they came home. Now, no, I hate that, privately, but, see, this is politics. I could make hay on that. I won't make hay on that. I want to talk about rebuilding the country, jobs, so on and so forth. Now, when you come down to that, now we'll talk very specifically about Governor Clinton's ability to do that, because that's relevant to the campaign.
As you said, Mr. Swindle said, we heard from our captors over and over again that they were encouraged by the protests. And you said the protests did prolong the war.
It's a fact. It's a fact. Is it relevant to this campaign? No. Would I prefer that they wouldn't discuss it? Yes. Do I discuss it? No.
But when you're talking, as you did lightheartedly the other day, about who would you like beside you in battle, who would you like to marry your daughter, who would you take a loan from, and all of those things, when you were talking about those things, isn't in fact whatever you were like 25 years ago, or Bill Clinton or George Bush was like 25 years ago, aren't we voting for someone with great power, therefore the character is important,
yes,
and therefore their CV is important?
No, the character is, in the final analysis, though, see, I wasn't saying to the American people which person to choose. My favorite one, when I told this large crowd, I said, now, if you had to leave for a year and leave your children with one of the candidates and his family, which one would you choose? And 30,000 people screamed back, Margot. And my wife, Margot, and thank God she was there, because she is a world, the children call her super mom. Right. And I thought, well, now, by golly, she earned that, and I love that.
That's right.
Leave them with Margot.
You nearly said your great phrase there, world class. You
yes.
started to say it. That's
no,
one of your...
Yes.
She's world class.
No, she is. She's just a wonderful lady, and would be a great first lady. The American people have fallen in love with her.
Yeah.
And that's,
but if she had 30,000 people to look after, even she might be a bit extended, though.
Oh,
if they all said that.
If they all left their children. But that's not the point. The point is, I'm trying to get down to, how do you just kind of in practical terms, I think in practical terms, would I loan this fellow money or not? If I wouldn't, he probably shouldn't be president. All right, if I was wounded on the battlefield, would he come out and get me? The answer is no, he shouldn't be president. If I wouldn't want him alongside me in combat that would stay with me, he shouldn't be president. And then just go ticking down through this. If I wouldn't want my daughter to marry him, he shouldn't be president. Now, I'm not saying how you should react. I'm saying just, now, I laughed, you know, well, guys take one look at me, look at the ears, look at the nose, he might say, geez, what are my grandchildren going to look at? I might not get through his filter there, right? Well, so the point being...
The I'm all ears is the memorable quote from all three debates, actually, isn't it?
Well, but see, the interesting thing is the American people are ready for somebody that's all ears. We're so sick and tired of people talking at us instead of listening to us. They are hungry and thirsty for public officials and a president that will listen, listen, listen to the people. Now, the theme of what I'm trying to do is to give the people a voice, so we can.
I'm sure you're right there. Although I think all of those criteria are fine, but I think in your case, the idea of someone discussing and thinking whether they'd loan money to you, a billionaire thing, you must have a job to relate to ordinary people when you're that rich.
Have you been to any of the rallies? Have you looked at any of the videotape? I can listen to and talk to ordinary people in plain talk, and the other two can't. Now, I come from their background. I love the people who make the world go around, and I would urge you to just spend, and if you have time today, you can watch the tapes from the rallies, and you decide if anybody else, if you put the two guys together in a blender and shake them up, if they could talk to ordinary people like I can, or if they understand ordinary people the way I do, or if they love, more importantly, I love the ordinary people in this country. And as Lincoln said, God must have loved the ordinary people because he made so many. I love them. No ifs, ands, and buts. And the thing that, now, here you've got a Texas billionaire with big ears, a bad nose, and a bad accent showing up in New Jersey where people are out of work. And you know what the theme of the rally is? People, everybody that I went by, because I'm just driving through in a car with the window down waving at people. You say, wait a minute, where's the motorcade? Where's the Secret Service? No, I don't want to lose touch with the people. See, you know what the most commonly repeated phrase was? I love you, Ross. Now that tells you how they feel about this not too good-looking Texas billionaire.
But in terms of the billionaire thing, Andrea, you may have seen this, I think it was in the USA Today, we're talking to grassroots people yesterday, and I'm absolutely bewildered by this quote, but Andrea Scheidler, who's 31, as we were saying earlier, they always put the age, of Cincinnati, who's a Perot supporter, said, she was defending you, and she said, he has a right to be paranoid, he's a rich man. Now, I'm not sure why those go together. But.
Well, number one, I'm not paranoid. Number two, a great deal had been written and said about me before I started this process. Part of the political process in our country, particularly from one party, is when you have a candidate who is attractive to the people and who can communicate with the people, is to try to redefine his character. You will never find the word paranoid used once in all of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of words written about me before this started. All of these new traits, I laugh. I say, I'll be glad to go back to being the person I really am. As opposed to the person they've redefined.
That quote, I wrote it down, was wonderful. In the regular world, when I used to be who I am.
Yeah.
Fantastic quote.
No, that's...
Not sure what it means, but it's fantastic.
This just means that you've got this giant propaganda machine up there at Republican National Headquarters that tries to redefine who you are, and I could give you 100 stories, but we can't get into them on 30 minutes. And these are not issues to the American people. The American people know me. They will draw their own conclusions. If they decide I am not the person to be in the White House, that's fine with me. If they want me there as their servant, I'll be there.
Now, the one thing I think that I don't know, and I think it keeps coming up, is this point, when you withdrew from the race, were you really 100% sure you were withdrawing, or was it a brilliant ploy, a ruse, because of what you said, much quoted on July the 18th, quote, if anyone thinks I've quit, they're going to be in for an October surprise. I mean, when you announced your withdrawal, did you know you were coming back? Did you think you might come back?
Had no idea. If both parties would step forward and respond to the needs of my supporters, there would have been no need for me to come back, but they did not.
So that the day you... Why did you say the thing about the October surprise on July the 18th then?
I don't recall saying anything about an October surprise.
Because that was quoted at a meeting with your volunteers.
Oh, you mean inside a meeting?
Inside a meeting.
I may have said in that meeting, but never publicly, because they wanted me to stay in the race. I said, look, let's give them a chance. In the meantime, we'll continue to get on the ballot in the 26 states we're not on the ballot in. Now, see, everybody likes to brush this one aside. We were only on the ballot in 24 states. God bless these people. They got me on the ballot in the last 26 states after I was out. Now, that was a cliff climb, David. They did it. Then I said, if they don't respond to you and we're on the ballot in all 50 states, we can come back in. Well, then they put me on the ballot. We gave both parties an opportunity to explain why they should not re-enter the race with me. They made the decision they wanted me to go back in the race. I had committed to them earlier that I would, and I'm back in the race.
So back on July the 18th, when you were talking to your supporters privately, you weren't 100% out of the race. You thought there was a 50% chance you might come back.
No, I was saying only if the two parties don't respond to you would it be even thinkable to do this. They felt the two parties did not respond. There was not a party they were willing to affiliate with. They wanted me to come back in. I'm back in. That's simple.
Because, I mean, Bill Clinton had published what you obviously decided was his inadequate economic plan.
I don't get a voice in this. This is
so before you withdrew, you know.
Yes. No, but the point is, all the volunteers make this decision. See, this is real democracy. This is more like the old town hall. This is not me getting in a smoke-filled room and said, well, let's just go back in, guys. It would have been a whole lot simpler for me if we hadn't had to go back in. I could have saved a whole lot of money if we hadn't had to go back in. It avoided a whole lot of the stuff you have to go through when you're back in. But I told them I'd do it, and I am doing it. I promised them a world-class campaign. They're getting a world-class campaign. So that
one of the reasons you left, which was the thing that the Democrats had got their act together, that had viable
and
policies.
Republicans.
But you actually said the Democrats had improved when you withdrew from the race, didn't you? You implied they'd...
No. When I started, the Democratic Party looked like they wouldn't even be able to come up with a candidate. It looked like it was a one-horse race. Then by the Democratic Convention, it was obvious that they had built some steam. And I said, the Democratic Party has revitalized itself. There are two parties now in the race. That's the point I was making. Never once did we mean to tilt toward either party.
I see.
And we do not.
Never to tilt towards either party.
No.
And the other point, you said you didn't want to mess up the American system and throw it into the House of Representatives. But now you're prepared to risk that.
That's what the volunteers wanted to do, David. I need to keep focusing you back on who the decision makers are. They're the decision makers. That's what they wanted to do, and that's what we're doing.
So were they, how many other reasons? There's the reason that's come up this week about your then fears about your daughter.
That's it, the daughter. And the daughter
and those, but those were those other two still true as well?
Yes.
Yeah. And now you've, now they've turned out to be unsubstantiated and you've said, I accept their word and they're denied.
No, David, you're completely...
Do you regret raising what you raised last weekend?
First, I didn't raise it. I did not raise it. I told 60 Minutes, you can't prove any of that, and I don't think you have a story. And you better approach this one with great skepticism, and I did not give them the story.
No, but
okay, now stay with, forget, I didn't raise it.
It says he first learned about the family factor from you.
No.
Months ago.
No.
And secondly, that you tipped him off about the tape, the David Taylor tape in Washington that would prove your case.
No, he knew, excuse me, that's not true. Number one, he got the story somewhere else. He called me. He knew about the tapes and all that stuff. I didn't tell him about that stuff. He knew about all that stuff from day one. Now, everybody, I guess, has to have his 15 minutes of fame. I don't know what they're doing. I did not want the story run the day the story ran. I had to respond.
You could have stopped that story running.
No, I could not.
Because he would never have run it. If he hadn't got you, he hadn't got the story.
You don't understand.
As he said today in USA Today.
Well, he can say that now that he does. But
there's no story unless you did it.
They were going to run the story, and I agreed.
Journalists always say that. Don't they? They always say that.
Well, that's what am I supposed to believe?
But I mean, they always say that to egg people on. But I mean,
David,
there was the story was you.
I said
the story was Ross
out.
Perot.
No. The way they cast it, if you look at the transcript of the interview and you look at what ran on 60 Minutes, there's a disconnect.
Given that the allegations were unsubstantiated, given that you've said, I accept their word, I accept their denial, don't you think it was irresponsible and unfair of you to cooperate in disseminating what has turned out to be unsubstantiated, untrue rumors?
Wait a minute. Unsubstantiated and untrue are two different things.
Unsubstantiated is certainly clear.
Well, there's a lot of evidence. Number two, I told you already, it's a risk I didn't have to take. That as an independent candidate, I could wait until after my daughter's wedding was over and come back in the race. As a Democrat or Republican, I couldn't.
But was it true that Barbara Bush reassured Margot about the dirty tricks at one of the debates?
At the end of the third debate, she came up to me and said, we didn't investigate your children. And my reaction was, she certainly, I am sure, thinks that, but how does she know what the Republican dirty tricks crowd is doing? Because I know what they were doing. And I know that they sent people across the country looking for anything they could find on my children. And I would like to put it all to bed. And I would like to forget it.
But so you do say you accept their word, you accept their denial, as you
I've said that since Sunday. I said, let's just put it behind us and focus on the issues that concern the American people.
What is the one issue, what is the one specific point that you think is the most important thing that you can get across to our viewers right now? The kernel of the message, why Ross Perot for president?
Pretty simple. If they want the status quo, they don't want me. If they want the country to continue to drift, they don't want me. If they want to go to work on these problems, solve them, and leave their children the American dream, then I'm a person that's dedicated to that. If they want somebody as their servant, I will go as their servant. It's all up to them.
There was one quote in the debates where you said, now I'm not a politician, but I think I could go to Washington in a week and get everybody holding hands and get this bill signed. How would you say that you can achieve that when other bright people can't? People have said that sounds awfully simplistic. I mean, it's idealistic, but how will you manage it?
Well, when the Democratic Party presented to our volunteers, they bled that they were for enterprise zones in the cities. But the Republicans were killing it. The Republicans came and presented to our volunteers and bled that they were for enterprise zones, but the Democrats were killing it. And I just laughed and I said, well, I'll take a week off, guys, and get y'all to quit throwing rocks at one another all day, every day. And since you're both for something that's good for the inner cities, we'll get it done. Now, I don't belong to anybody but the people. And I paid for everything myself. And as I've said to them, yes, I had to pay for it because you couldn't afford it. And I did it as an act of love for you. And that's exactly why I've done it. And it's up to the people. If they want the status quo, I'll go back to a normal life. If they don't, I'll have 4 years of abnormality, but I'll do it as their servant. If anybody ought to have 4 years, you know, having to fool with this, as lucky as I've been, that's the least I could put back.
The ultimate act of philanthropy?
No, love. This is just love. I love the American people. They know that. In a cynical world of the elitists, it's hard for people to understand. But just follow me around sometime, you'll see.
Ross Perot, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We talked to Governor Clinton earlier today on the campaign trail in Pittsburgh. Governor, it's a great pleasure to see you again.
Thank you, David. I'm glad to be back.
Thank you. Well, when Harry Truman became president, that was April 1945, he said that he felt as if the sun, the moon, and the stars had fallen in on him. How does the thought of becoming president make you feel?
I feel gratitude and a great sense of responsibility and a great sense of exhilaration. The problems are very large and very complex, but the opportunities are very significant. If I win, because as we speak there are 4 days left to go and 4 hard days, but if I do, I'm going to do everything I can to be faithful to the people who elected me and the charge of the office and the history of the country, and the enormous potential as well as the problems we have.
And as you say, 4 days to go. But I mean, it's an awesome thought, that the fact that you might have the presidency of the United States in 4 days. So that I should think, as he looks down on us now, that Bill Blythe must be pretty proud of the son that he never met.
I hope he is, and I like to think that he would be. I think about that from time to time.
You think about it a lot, don't you?
You know, I'm not obsessed with it, but it does. I think about it, and I think that in a way, maybe if I do a good job at this, if the people give me a chance, it will be not only an important thing for my life, but for the legacy that my father, whom I never met, left.
And when you ask people, the American people, to have the courage to change, what would you say is the most courageous change you've made in your life?
That is a difficult thing to say. I think that it was very hard for me growing up for a long time as an only child, and the child of a father who died before I was born, and then with the troubles in my home, to avoid being a real loner in life. I always did pretty well, you know, in school and with activities, but I was afraid I would never be able to work with other people to get things done, and opening yourself to the criticism, to the scrutiny, to the evaluation of other people, as you do if you're in this kind of life. You got to be willing to put up with a lot of stuff. I think is the only way you can ever galvanize the energies of others and work with other people to get things done. And for me, the more comfortable course would have been to, you know, I don't know, set up my own law practice or be a writer or do something else where I could have been more on my own and more in total control of my own destiny. And I think that from the beginning of my childhood, being able to consistently change to be more open to criticism, to be more open to others, to get to where I could listen to other people and work with other people, that was a very difficult thing for me.
So that change, in the sense you're picking really the moment when you went into politics rather than something like the law, in fact, and that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know. It all began, I think it was a process that went on for years. It started when I was an older child, I think. And it, you know, it went on when I married my wife and, you know, did all the kinds of commitments you make in life to basically give yourself over to other people and to work with other people and to do things. I think those were difficult for me because I was by nature a very solitary and self-reliant and self-contained child.
So that's a big step. That's a big step. You were mentioning 4 days to go, and the latest polls today, one of them's 41-39 and one's 41-40, so they're closer, but you're still in the lead. Therefore, how can you be, as you said yesterday, an underdog when you've been in the lead for so long? Admittedly, the lead shortened, but can the leader in a opinion poll be an underdog?
Oh, I think so. And
How?
Because, first of all, I'm trying to defeat an incumbent president, which is difficult. Secondly, I'm trying to defeat the incumbent president on a platform of real change in the way the government works in this country, different from what either party has done before. So I'm asking the American people not to embrace trickle-down economics, not to embrace tax and spend economics, but to go beyond that. Thirdly, it's always difficult for people to imagine that someone they met recently, and they did meet me recently, could be someone who would both challenge and change the country and someone who would care for the country. I think we want both from a president. So I have always been the psychological underdog in this race. I knew that from the beginning. And I've worked hard, and I'm continuing to press. I have decided to run a flat-out, offensive, aggressive campaign down to the last hour.
But do you feel the dynamics have turned against you in the sense that here's a new television lead, the lead's gone down like that? Do you feel at the moment that there's a bandwagon effect the other way?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, if you look, these polls vary between 1 point and 11 points, and if you argue that they're somewhere in between, then by American standards, that's still a significant lead. But what I think is that as the election gets closer, people are looking for ways to be reassured, and it is easy for fear to dominate hope, which is why Mr. Bush has spent virtually 100% of his money on negative advertisements, many of them just made up out of whole cloth, but designed to, the message is you should be frightened of Bill Clinton and Al Gore. You should not trust them. Things may be lousy, but at least you know me. I mean, that's the whole message there.
But what about the other factor in the race? Do you think, for instance, if people want change, real change, would be to elect Ross Perot, I suppose? I mean, or do you think a vote for Ross Perot is a wasted vote?
Well, I think that either George Bush or Bill Clinton will win this election. And the people who are for Mr. Perot will have to think that, consider that. But I also believe I've really given the American people a program for change. There is, for example...
What's wrong with his, though? Why isn't his even better?
Well, I think there are reasons why his isn't even better, but let's talk about whether they're the same, because both of us have come out for very specific and nearly identical restrictions on political action committees, on the cost of congressional campaigns, on the influence of lobbyists over the political process to change the way the government works. And I think that's important. The difference between our two plans is basically that mine brings the deficit down more slowly but creates more jobs in the short run.
But I mean, do you think, looking at this Ross Perot campaign, do you think it's a wonderful example of the American way that someone can make a fortune and then spend it any way they want? Or do you think there's something marginally un-American about buying your way into an election?
I think the people are going to have to make up their mind about that. Look, I need to spend these next 4 days trying to give this election back to the American people, trying to make it about them and their future. We're going to win this thing if they think about what it will be like on the day after the election.
But what you're doing actually is what George Bush and you both did at the debate, which is you have to go soft on Ross Perot because you both would like his supporters' votes.
It's not just a question of going soft. I've been very clear where I disagree with him. I don't mind saying where I disagree with his economic program, why I'm confident that mine's better, and why my background, I think, is better. I'm the only person running. We all talk about change. I'm the only person running who's ever balanced a government budget, who's ever taken on lobbyists, who's never been a part of the Washington insider establishment, and who's ever passed a program through a legislature. I don't mind differing with Ross Perot. I just don't think it's very fruitful for me to characterize him. He had the right to run. He complied with the rules to get on the ballots. And I think many of the things he said have been useful. I think calling attention to the debt, calling attention to the wasted spending, calling attention to the need to get a full accounting for the POWs.
But I was surprised, in our interview on Wednesday, I was surprised. He said his policy was, in terms of tilt, was never once did we mean to tilt towards either party. I thought that if pressed, he had a soft spot for the Democrats, actually, but he was very clear, no tilting in either direction. Does that surprise you?
No, because he still wants to get votes. I mean,
so he's being tactful about both of you, you mean?
I mean, you know, I think it's obvious from everything he said that he would be really sorry if Mr. Bush got 4 more years, given the deep distrust that is between them on personal and political grounds. But he's trying to get votes for himself, so you would expect him to do that.
Okay. Back in May, in our fondly remembered interview in May, on the marijuana issue when it came up, you said very engagingly, you said, I was dumb as a post the way I handled that. Would you use the same phrase to describe your handling of this seemingly endless reporter-led revelations about Vietnam and the draft? That you've handled that equally the same way?
No, I wouldn't say dumb as a post, but there's a difference of issue there. That marijuana thing was just a dumb deal, what I said. On this issue, there's a different, I don't think I answered the questions as well as I might have, but I think what happened was that I had been in public life from 1974, 5 years after the ROTC deferment was issued and given up, and I went back into the lottery, through 1992 when I began this campaign, or late 1991 when I began this campaign for president. During all that time, when I was right there and all the principals were still alive and everybody who knew everything that happened was there, no one ever said I did anything wrong, and when asked, people said that I did not do anything wrong. So one of the things that I did not do when all this happened was to have already gathered any notes I could find, any letters I could find, call people and refresh my memory, so that I literally, didn't do a very good job of answering some of the questions. But the fundamental facts are still clear and still undisputed. But I think that what happened was we had this running series of questions, and I was asked to recall with great precision what happened 23 years ago with oftentimes no memory supports. Right. And so I didn't answer them all as well as I should have.
Yeah, there was a sympathetic analysis of this, I don't know whether you read it, Charles Peters in the Washington Monthly. He said, I think most fair-minded people have been willing to forgive Bill Clinton for trying to avoid military service in Vietnam. My guess is that he hasn't been willing to forgive himself. I think that's why questions about his draft history continue to trip him up long after he should have learned the danger of answering them in a misleading way. In other words, he was saying that rather as he felt when he was in fact invalided out of the war, that there's a deep-seated, albeit maybe irrational, guilt there somewhere that gets in the way of your answers. Not guilt, not necessarily well-founded, criminal guilt, not talking about that. It's a psychological sense of guilt. I mean, he said there were 3 reasons. One was having the knowledge that an underprivileged boy might have been sent in your place. A less rational one that you'd evaded a test of manhood, and the third one, which made more sense to him, he said, was in fact the sense that it's extremely important to men like Bill Clinton, who have aspired to leadership positions since their grade school days, that war tests how a young leader, like with Kennedy, will perform in the clutch. I mean, that was roughly what he said.
Well, I think he overdid it a little bit, but I do think there was some part of me that I grew up in Arkansas. I mean, I grew up with a legacy of World War II. I grew up with the memory of a dead father who fought in World War II in a state that was very pro-military, and I always had very strong positive feelings myself about military service. So that finding myself knowing what I thought I knew, and I still believe I did know about the war, and feeling the way I did about it was a very difficult thing. It was not an easy thing. And then when all these questions began to be asked, and people who had previously said, I did not do anything wrong, the same people said, oh, yes, he did, and here's what it is, and then people asking me questions that I couldn't remember all the answers to. I think I did try too many times to answer questions off the top of my head when I would have been far better by saying, I do not have an exact memory about that. I will try to figure out what happened, and if I don't know, I just can't tell you.
But is there a sort of, perhaps inchoate guilt or regret that, in fact, you didn't go? That somehow... I
regret that the whole thing happened. I regret that it occurred and that I felt the way I did about it, and I wish it hadn't happened in my life or anybody else's, but I can't, it's over. I can't rewrite it. The only day I can affect is what happens today and tomorrow. I have no control over that. And one of the things that I think this whole experience has done for me is to really free me up from it. You know, I have received from Vietnam veterans a Purple Heart, a Vietnam Battle Medal, a Bronze Star, from people who said, I believe in you, it's time to put this behind us. At every rally there are Vietnam veterans. There was here in Pittsburgh today who said, I fought there. A guy came up to me today and said, I did 2 tours and I'm for you.
So are you, in that case, are you proud of your opposition to the Vietnam War?
Well, I'm proud that I did what I thought was right. As all the people who knew me then have commented, you know, I was not, I was hardly a well-known protester. I was a person who just felt it was wrong and said so, and felt very strong feelings about it. But mostly I'm proud of the fact that I've lived a very good and useful life since then. I've made real contributions, and my ideas now will be more valuable for the Vietnam veterans in 4 more years of Bush and Quayle. That's what I believe. I think, and that's what these veterans say to me. I mean, I have been really moved by the support of rank-and-file Vietnam veterans, Medal of Honor winners, all kinds of service people. And, as you know, the endorsement recently of 24 retired generals and admirals, including one of President Bush's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Operation Desert Storm. So I have got these people supporting me because they believe that I have sound values, sound views, and a good plan for the future. And I'm trying to make sure that the American people focus on that. I have answered the draft question over and over again, and I must say my answers are far more coherent, consistent, and apparently accurate than what Mr. Bush has said about arms for hostages or Rockgate or all that sort of stuff.
The reason I wanted to take the overall issue and not go through all those details again is that we did that quite fully, you know.
Yeah, we did.
Back in May, and I was coming, that's why I wanted to talk about the overall principle. Indeed, it is a reasonable debating point, isn't it? I mean, what do you feel? Do you think actually there is a qualitative difference between protesting in Washington and protesting in a foreign country? Is that a fair debatable point?
I don't think there's much of a difference between what we did. We, the Americans, in a church, in a teach-in at a university, at the American embassy. There was no sense that any of us were trying to be disloyal to our country. We loved our country. We were trying to change a policy. We thought we were doing what we could in a very peaceful and totally law-abiding way to save lives and to strengthen our country. And, you know, I don't want to go back and argue it, but I think Vietnam paralyzed us in a lot of ways for a long time after it was over. Made us, for too long, unwilling to be robust in the assertion of our values and our interests around the world, and called into question too many things. I mean, I really believe if I win this race, with the support of as many Vietnam veterans as I've had and the support of the military leadership who have overcome whatever feelings they might have to say this guy's got the best plan for the future and has the skills and the character and the strength to lead, I think it really will put an end to the Vietnam War. I think that if we win on Tuesday, finally, the war that Mr. Bush said, quote, cleaves us still, will be in our past.
Yeah, Ross Perot, in our interview, confirmed Admiral Stockdale's view that he thought the protesters prolonged the war. But you don't think that?
No, I don't. And I have very strong feelings about it. I don't think that because we were backing a side which itself could not win. After we pulled out in 1975, the South Vietnamese government, which at that time had about the fourth biggest army in the world, lasted 10 days or something. I just don't think so. I think that had it gone on, had there been no objection to it, it would have gone on longer, but the options we had for winning were no better.
And you don't think that it prolonged it because, as he said something about, you know, dissent gives encouragement to people overseas? I mean,
No.
Do you think it actually shortened it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the suggestion that if we'd had no dissenters, that the other side would have rolled over is just wrong. I think but let me say something else. The other lesson of this war is if you're going to draft people and put them into combat, you should sell the conflict to the American people. You should get Congress to declare war so there can be no doubt about what the objective is. And there ought to be clear and achievable objectives that you then put everything you've got behind achieving. And none of those things happened in Vietnam. One of the things that it prepared me to do, and I think the people who served in our generation, people like Senator John Kerry and Senator Bob Kerry, I think all of us are determined to see that something like that does not happen again.
What do you look at more closely every morning? The poll numbers or the long-term interest rates?
The long-term interest rates concern me. You know, right now, 4 days before the election, obviously I'm interested in the polls. I want to know where the people are. I mean, you know, who are we kidding? I mean, that's important. But I've really worked hard to try to send a clear signal to the markets that I will be a president who will operate with discipline and real appreciation for the dependence of the United States on the rest of the world and the importance of having a serious economic program that promotes growth and reduces the deficit because we need stable markets and low interest rates. We need that to recover. But we also have to end the credit crunch, and we've got to get investment back in the economy. I have done what I could in conversations with market leaders in New York and with others in a position to influence how people who operate those markets or influence those markets think, to send them a signal that, you know, you don't have to go haywire if a Democrat wins. I mean, even when Jack Kennedy won, and he had a very good economic performance, there was nervousness in the markets, you know. They don't have to worry about that. I have been a job creator, not a job destroyer. I believe in free enterprise. I believe in market economics. I believe in a different kind of government that regulates less and gives people more choices and imposes more responsibility.
Yeah, well, people say a bit like Nixon and China, that it's only a Democrat who could really take a machete to to the entitlements and so on?
Well, I don't think it's just the entitlements. I think that, let me just say that the strategy that has been followed in Washington has been to cut Medicare in an attempt to control health care costs, so that now elderly people in America pay a bigger percentage of their income for health care than they did before Medicare came in. And what happens is we have refused to learn the lessons of all the European countries and the lesson of Hawaii in our own country, which is that you have to have a system which holds down costs paid for by private dollars as well as public dollars, or you can't control health care costs. If you just whittle away at Medicare, you can't. But I do believe the general point is right. I would have a much better chance than a Republican president or than Mr. Perot would to get Congress to restrain spending, to give me a line item veto, to reform the whole structure of a lot of federal programs, to get control of this deficit. I think I would have a much better chance because, for one thing, I've run on a program of doing that, on being a different kind of Democrat. For another thing, they would have no one to blame. In other words, the President and the Congress have presided over a doubling of the debt in 4 years, and they've been able to point the finger at one another. Most people think Congress is the big spender, but in fact, Mr. Bush asked them to spend a little more money than they spent. Yeah. So if I were president, they would have to work with me, and I would have to work with them because we couldn't blame each other. We'd have to take responsibility. And it's consistent with my work.
Let me ask you one thing. I don't want to go through the whole economic thing, but there's a point that I made when I was talking to President Bush on Monday that lots of people think that neither of your sums add up, that they're both too optimistic. And will you just give me the kernel, rather than going through the whole list, which I know you've done a million times, but take Rich Thomas of Newsweek. Even on his own mathematics, Clinton gets virtually all of his claimed deficit reduction by assuming that his borrow, tax and spend will prove to be a veritable elixir, whipping the moribund economy into an instant gallop that produces huge increases in taxable incomes and profits. Presto, he could have said, hey, presto, I suppose. Federal revenues soar, producing fully 9/10 of Clinton's own claimed reduction in the budget. 9/10.
No.
Is he wrong?
Yeah.
And if so, why?
Well, for one thing, he doesn't point out that the tax revenues we propose to raise includes revenues that 2/3 of which will finance tax cuts and incentives to promote economic growth. So we're not adding that much in tax revenues. Secondly, there's $140 billion in spending cuts in that program with, I think, a lot more potential cuts out there. And thirdly, there are a lot of people who just don't agree with him. I mean, Time magazine had an independent panel of economists evaluate our 3 plans. They said mine had the best chance to promote jobs and growth.
Yeah, but no, well, you've given your answer there, but I mean, to be fair, that panel did say that, but Washington Post and the New York Times, when they do their analyses, they tend to say, on the one hand, this is why this program, the Bush program, is too optimistic, and then they say it roughly equally strongly with you. I mean, that will only be, obviously, well, let me tell you, that will only be proven whoever wins.
But the revenue estimates we adopted were not, were the modest growth scenario that we got out of looking at the Congressional Budget Office and out of what the Bush administration's recommendations were. I think that these things will materialize if we can get growth. But let me say this, if we don't, I'm prepared to cut more. The point I was just going to make is you can't control health care costs simply by cutting Medicare. That's a different cost. Are there other things we can cut in the government? Of course there are.
And you've said very clearly that you won't have any extra taxes for the middle classes if the revenues are not
to pay for these programs.
No. If the revenues are not what you've predicted or expected, that then you will either phase them in more slowly or make
cut more spending
cuts
elsewhere. Absolutely.
So the more cuts would be what, something like defense?
No, well, I don't think we can commit today to cut more out of defense than I have already recommended until we know more about where we're going. But I think there are water projects, for example, that are non-competitive, that are awarded on political bases that don't have to be funded. There are highway demonstration projects. Not all of them have to be funded. There are all kinds of commissions that serve no useful purpose that can be defunded. There are billions of dollars in other cuts out there we could make that wouldn't hurt real people in their lives.
All right, as we come towards the end of our time, alas, do you feel at this point, James Carville gave a memorable quote in the last few hours, I think. He said, one of your key advisors, he said, "I'm not nervous. It's more like a gripping fear. How do you feel as it gets closer and closer? Do you feel a little extra pressure, a little extra nerves?
Sure you do. You always wonder whether you could have done something else, should have done it in some different way, whether there's something else that could be done. But in the end, I think that it is a very clear choice. And I just have to make sure the American people understand what my side of the choice is, that I represent a new approach, a different approach, and that they're going to have to imagine what their lives will be like after the election if we have a continuation of the Bush government and the trickle-down approach, or if we try this new approach. I recognize it takes more courage to change than to stay put, but we've tried this other thing for 12 years now, and it's time to try something new.
I asked Ross Perot this, what would the first line of your inaugural be?
Something like this. My fellow Americans, we meet at a time of great challenge, a time full of enormously complicated problems and wonderful opportunities, a time of change which no person in public life can repeal.
No, that's more than the first line. I see exactly what you mean, and the tone you struck was slight contrast with the man from Dallas. The first line of his inaugural was, "You're the boss, I'm Ross." So that was a rather different tone. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation enormously.
Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot.
This program is brought to you by Primerica, a family of financial companies including Smith Barney, Investments, Primerica Financial Services, Term Insurance, Commercial Credit, Personal Loans, and American Capital Management, Mutual Funds. Video cassettes of this program can be purchased for home or educational use by calling 1-800-328-PBS1.
This is PBS.
For a printed transcript of this program, send $7 to David Frost Transcript, Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203. To order by credit card, call 303-831-9000.
The long-running war over the Equal Rights Amendment moves its battleground to Iowa on Election Day 1992, and we'll get both sides of the story with activist Phyllis Schlafly and Eleanor Smeal on this week's edition of Iowa Press. That's Sunday at noon and at 7 here on Iowa Public Television.
The Iowa race for the Senate nears the finish line with the final strides run in a debate between Gene Lloyd Jones and Charles Grassley. Iowa Public Television brings you live coverage of the debate sponsored by the Greater Des Moines Chamber of Commerce Federation. Watch the Senate candidates debate Monday live at 12:30 and again at 8 the same evening. Then at 10:30, watch the speeches delivered to the Chamber audience by alternative party candidates in the Senate Race Alternative Views.
Something has happened in another part of the world or another part of town. A story is unfolding, and public television is there.
Confrontation will get South Africa nowhere.
It is a story of conflict between people, cultures, and countries. A story of victories and defeat, of armies and ideas.
A totalitarianism and a brutality that is naked and unprecedented.
Told in the clear and thoughtful voice of public television's critically acclaimed news and public affairs programs.
What I am saying...
You are withdrawing from that.
No.
Because news is more than information. Because events deserve our attention and understanding. Because life is not a soundbite.
A resource for Iowa's future. Iowa Public Television.
November 3rd, Iowans must make two very important decisions. First, we must choose a president. Then we must decide which station to watch. We need a station which has made an unsurpassed commitment to election coverage, a channel which has explored the issues and concerns of Iowa voters. On election night, choose the station that offers a balanced ticket, election updates, commentary and analysis, and some special programming. Tuesday night, choose a resource for Iowa's future, Iowa Public Television.
I'm Jim Lara. On November 3rd, join Robert McNeil and me for a NewsHour Election Night special with full analysis of the returns and live reports from campaign headquarters. The following night, November 4th, we'll be back with a special 90-minute look at the next 4 years, asking the simple question, now what? Join us for these important public events here on public television.
This is Iowa Public Television. Portions of our broadcast day are made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and Friends of Iowa Public Television. Stay tuned for more TV worth watching right here on Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future.
Because of the length of David Frost's interviews with the major presidential candidates, the Mark Russell special scheduled for this time will be seen at 11. The Nightly Business Report is next.